Hooks are the new way to code in React. Classes are now part of the past, but if you had spent some time learning React in the past years with classes, don't worry, that knowledge can still be useful. But for now, you can forget about having to keep biting this. Hooks basically use the same concepts you already know with classes, but using functions. For example, in class components, when we want to fetch data from an external API, we usually use the famous Axios methods component.mount and component.update. But with hooks, we could use the useEffect hook, and in just one function, we could have the same logic we used to split in different lifecycle methods. Stating hooks is similar as in classes, but stating hooks doesn't have to be just one object. Instead, in hooks, you can have individual state values. And there's no need to start rewriting your old React code. Hooks can be implemented side by side with class components. Also keep in mind that hooks are still in alpha version at the moment of recording this video, but they will probably be released in React 16.7. This video is part of my React Hooks course, so make sure to click on the link in the description below so you get access to the full course. And before we start, I would like to recommend 3 different tools. The first one is Prettier. Prettier allows you to automatically format your code, so it's super helpful when you are working with JavaScript and basically any other language. I use Bean as my editor, but I know the cool kids now they use Visual Studio, and it's available for pretty much any editor, as you can see here. The other tool is ESLint. This is a linting utility for JavaScript and I think other languages. So it's really helpful because it gives you some warnings and some recommendations when you're working on the code before you actually go to check on the browser. The last one is this is a snippet utility. It's available for Bean only, but there's obviously many different plugins and utilities for other editors. I like to use my own snippets instead of trying to remember other people's snippets. So this is very helpful for me. All these tools are not required, but I highly recommend that you use them. Okay, so this is the app we're gonna create. It's a simple app based on the TV show Rick and Morty. What you can do here is search characters from the show. So, for example, if I type Rick and hit enter, we get some results based on the name Rick. So it's basically different Ricks from different universes. And if we click on any of these pictures, we go to a details page here with the ID, and we can see some more information from the character. And here we get a random quote from another API. These are the 2 APIs we are going to use. This one is to get the characters, so you can get information from a particular character. You can search, and yeah, there's many further options here. And this one is to get the random quote, so it's basically one of those Lorem Ipsum APIs where you can get different paragraphs for testing or things like that. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to generate a new React app. So I will use the create React app tool. Let's call this application Rick Finder. Hit enter. I will fast forward this part. So once this is done, we can cd into the folder. Okay, so now we can install the version of React that supports hooks. which is version 16.7.0 alpha 2 at the moment of recording this video. So let's type npm install react 16.7.0 alpha 2. And we also need the React DOM package at the same version. So 16.7.0 alpha 2. So in case you don't know, basically all the magic happens in the React DOM package. All the implementation of hooks and many different things. So this is really important that you have the React DOM version matching the other. Okay, so once this is done, we can start our React app. So we type npm start. And we should see this default page that is created by the tool. So now we are ready to start our app. Okay, so now let's open the app.js file. And here we can see that we get a class-based component. So as we are going to work with hooks, we delete this. And let's create some skeleton code for the hook. So the first thing is to call this app. This component will be called app. It's the same as the other one. And here we see we need to we are importing two different hooks or aka modules. The first one is useState. useState, as the name implies, is the one that we use to handle our state in the component. And the other hook is the useEffect, and this one is used to call other APIs. This is one that we will use to call the Rick and Morty API. Okay, so now let's define our state. In this case, I will use a state variable to save the results from the API. I will call this data. And here I will initialize the state with an object with a property called results. That will be an empty string. This is because the API returns here. It returns an object, and all the characters are in this results array. So we need to initialize the variable like that. And here we are destructuring the result from that function. And the first variable that it returns is the data, the state variable, and the second is the setter for that variable. And this could be anything. It could be result, and here set result. Okay, so now let's call the useEffect function. And this function takes another function as an argument. And I will use the async await syntax. So here we pass an arrow function. And inside this arrow function is where we will call the API. So let's first use another package called Axios. So let's import that. So now let's install the package. We just need to type npm install Axios and hit enter. So now we can use the Axios function here. So let's define another constant called result. And this will be a call to the Axios, which this function returns a promise. So we use the await syntax here, and in the function we need to pass the URL for the API. So let's go to the API page, and let's copy this URL here, and let's paste that in this function. So now after this function is called and we get a result, we can set the state. In this case we call set data, and here we pass the result variable and the data property, which is the one that contains the information that we need. So now let's return something from this component so we can actually see something in the screen. So let's define a new div here. Let's use a class name called results, and inside this div let's loop through the results and use the map function so we can basically create a new lead item, a new lead tag from each result. So let's call this here. Let's close this function here. Okay, so lead item.name, which will be the name of the character, and let's save this and check on the browser. And here we can see we got a list of characters, so that means this is working. So everything seems to be working fine, but if we open Chrome DevTools, we should see different warnings here in the console. And if we click on the network tab, we can see we are calling the API every few milliseconds. By default, the useEffect hook is called on every render. So when we call the API, we get some data here, and we set the data here. We are updating the state variable, making the component to trigger another render. So that will make the useEffect to be called again, get the data again, and we set the data again, so making that an infinite loop. So to fix this issue, we just need to pass a new argument to the useEffect function, and this will be an empty array. And what this will do is to make the useEffect hook to be called only on the first render. The useEffect hook is run only after all the DOM updates are done. So if you think in class component concepts, this is like using the component did mount and component did update methods, but just in one place. So if we open Chrome DevTools, we can see that we are calling the API only once now. Okay, so now let's add an input field so we can actually search characters from the API. We will need a handle submit here and an input tag here. This will be of type text, and the value will be a state variable called query. And on change, we want to set the value to the set query state variable. So say set state query e.target.value, and let's close this stack. And we got a warning here. That's because this hold return needs to be wrapped in a div. So let's call this results wrapper, and let's move this code here and save. So now let's define our state variable here at the top. It will be called query, and we initialize this with an empty string. And as you can see, we can have one or many useState calls here at the top of our component, and this could be different types. Like here we have an object, here we have a string. As a good practice, you should always have the state definitions at the top, and you should never use if conditions around hooks, because hooks depends on the order they are defined. So that's really important. Okay, so now let's define the handle submit function. This will be a constant. Handle submit, we pass the event, and here we'll just prevent the form is not sent to the server. For now, let's just leave it like this. And in this second argument that we pass to the useEffect function, this is where we pass the state variables that we want to watch. So here, let's say we want to watch the query state variable. So when there's a change in this state variable, this will trigger the useEffect hook. So let's pass this as a query string here. So we can actually query this, and let's change this closing quotes to a string literal, so we can actually use this variable here, but we need to use the $sign here. So now we will use the query to be sent to the API. I think we're ready to start testing this. So if we type something here, for example, type M, we can see that the request to the API is done. But the problem here is that there's a call for each keystroke. So we don't want that. We want to send the keyword when the user basically completes the word. So let's fix that. To do that, we will use another state variable. Let's call this search, and it will be initialized as an empty string. And we want to set this state variable here when the user submits the form, and the value will be the query that will be in the input field. And here we will watch the search instead of the query state variable, but we also need a button here, so we can actually click and submit the form. This will be of type submit, and let's put this label here. So now let's go back to the browser, and if we type Morty and click search, we can see the request here, and we get the data that we want. Okay, so now let's show some more information on the screen. For example, we have an image for each character from the API. So let's show that here. The alt could be the name of the character, and the source is the property image. And we may want to enclose the name in a tag, so let's do that. Let's call this name. Let's copy this from here to here. And we can see we got the images for the characters. So I have a CSS that I already created, and I will use that here because I don't think it makes sense to type the whole CSS in this video. So let's do that. Let's open the app.css file. I will just delete all this and copy the CSS from the other document. And now we need to import that CSS here. App.css. And we should see there's some better formatting of the page.